says the sooner the better for direct talks between the US and the DPRK during its foreign minister's annual press conference. Why is the timing so crucial, and what has to be done to seize that momentum? And China released its 2018 defense budget, setting a modest 8% growth target. Why does China believe it is enough to protect itself? Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi urged the US and the DPRK, or the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, to engage in direct talks as soon as possible when he held his annual press conference on Thursday. But he also cautioned against noises that might disrupt the momentum, as has been the experience in the past. China believes the suspension for suspension proposal it introduced helped create the necessary conditions for that rapprochement. So how to seize and capitalize on the momentum, and with plans for a summit between the two Koreas planned in April, what can we expect? I'm joined in the studio by Dr. Zhao Tong, fellow at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy, and from London by Dr. Tat Yan Kong, reader at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Well, the suspension for suspension approach introduced by China means that on the side of the US and the ROK, they suspend the joint military drill, and on the side of the DPRK, that they suspend nuclear and missile tests. And during the Winter Olympic Games so far, this is what we have experienced, and Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that proved that China's proposal is the right prescription for creating the right basic condition for the improvement of ties between the two sides. So, Dr. Zhao, looking ahead beyond the Pyeongchang Games, do you think this approach could be sustained?
Firstly, I think the approach is already working. I used to talk to my American colleagues, including American officials and scholars. They told me that they were not opposed to the suspension for suspension proposal. It's just that they hadn't seen any credible signal from North Korea that North Korea wants to embrace this proposal. But now you have North Korea openly offering to suspend their nuclear and missile tests. So clearly, even though the proposal has not received official and high-level endorsement, but in fact the relevant parties are already implementing this strategy. Looking forward, I think North Korea has already put something on the table. There are many things the US can reciprocate with. For example, US can reduce the most provocative elements in its joint exercises, even if the joint exercises have to conduct on schedule. And also US can send high-level officials to talk with North Korea, and that meeting, high-level meeting by itself, would help improve political relations with North Korea. U.S. can certainly also considering further relaxing some of the unilateral sanctions on North Korea, but of course that will have to wait before North Korea make substantive progress towards nuclear disarmament.
Well, Wang Yi said also that we should understand the DPRK's legitimate security concerns, and the joint military exercises by ROK and the US are set to resume in April, however, according to plan. But according to the ROK's National Security Council chief, who led the ROK delegation to Pyongyang, Chun Wei-yong, the DPRK leader Kim Jong Un said he did not oppose the drills if they would be of a similar scale seen in the past years. So, Dr. Tat Yan Kong in London, the DPRK has vowed not to conduct nuclear or missile tests as long as talks are ongoing. So do you think that the DPRK has changed their position?
In fact, the DPRK first mentioned the idea of a suspension for suspension as early as January 2015, but this was rejected by the United States. I think the DPRK is serious. They want to enter into dialogue with the United States, and they realize that they have to put something on the table. Whilst the DPRK would be able to go ahead with a summit with South Korea, even if the joint drills go ahead, but I think in order to make a positive environment for DPRK United States talks, it would certainly make sense to maybe scale down the joint drills, or actually change their character. And the joint drills actually raises one of the bigger issues about the security that the DPRK has actually been demanding. So in the long term, if we're looking for denuclearization, I think there has to be some negotiation, some movement regarding the nature of the US-ROK military alliance and the American military footprint on the Korean peninsula.
Dr. Zhao, as I said, the leader of the DPRK, Kim Jong Un, is said to have said that he would not oppose the drills if they would be of a similar scale seen in previous years. This is contrast to what they were saying before, when they were vehemently opposing and criticizing these joint military drills. Do you think that the DPRK has changed their mind?
I think indeed, because of level of the threat from the joint drills to DPRK has changed. A few months ago, DPRK was vehemently opposed to the drills because at that time the military tensions were very high. The US was seriously considering a military option against North Korea. And the North Korean concern is the US could very well use the large drill as a disguised preparation for a real military attack that happened before in history. But now the situation has changed. The North-South relationship has improved dramatically. The North was about even to talk with the United States directly. So the chances for the US to deliberately want to attack North Korea has dramatically decreased.
Right.
And therefore I think North Korean concern about a joint exercise is also diminished.
What about their resolve to continue to conduct tests on either nuclear tests or missile tests, but now they're said not to conduct these tests so long as talks are ongoing? Does that also shift a change in their attitude, Dr. Zhao?
I think so. Last year, North Korea conducted dozens of missile tests of various kinds, in addition to a nuclear test. And North Korea has not done that for a few months. I think after achieving a basic nuclear deterrent, after 3 successful intercontinental ballistic missile tests, North Korea has obtained a basic deterrent capability, and therefore they are willing to exercise some self-restraint. And this offering of suspending missile nuclear tests, I think, falls in line with North Korea's strategic planning.
Well, after the meeting with DPRK leader Kim Jong Un on Tuesday, ROK envoy Chun said that the North clearly affirmed its commitment to the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and said it would have no reason to possess nuclear weapons should the safety of its regime be guaranteed and military threats against North Korea removed. Dr. Tat Yan Kong, what does that signify?
That signifies what they've always sought. They've always sought a guarantee for the survival of their regime. What that means is the ending of hostility between the DPRK and the United States. What it means is the replacement of the current armistice agreement by a peace treaty, the normalization of diplomatic relations, the lifting of sanctions. And I think in the long term, the establishment of some sort of comprehensive security mechanism for the region, so that we don't rely on security via balance of power, so that the conditions whereby the DPRK relies on nuclear weapons for its survival, so that those conditions can actually be established, a security framework.
Right. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi also mentioned that whenever tensions in the peninsula subside, the situation will be clouded by various interferences, and the comment comes at a crucial moment for testing whether the parties involved are truly sincere in resolving the issue. Dr. Zhao, what do you think is the biggest possible cloud now, and who should try harder?
Well, I think the biggest cloud is the fact that the United States has not made its decision about what goal it should pursue in the near-term future. So after the North Korean offering of suspending missile nuclear tests, that indicates North Korea is willing to consider freezing and capping their nuclear program. So for the United States, some American experts already argue that they have achieved the minimum objective of freezing North Korea capability if they take on the North Korean offer. But some others want to achieve more. They want to aim higher. They want to achieve denuclearization once and for all. So it's a major debate with the United States, and that creates uncertainty in terms of how the U.S. would respond to the recent North Korean overture.
Dr. Tat Yan Kong, the ROK delegation led by the head of the delegation to DPRK, Mr. Chung, is on their way to the United States to brief the Trump administration on their talk with the North. How do you think the United States is likely to respond to the situation?
Well, I think by instinct, President Trump is not inclined towards compromise with a state like North Korea. But on the other hand, you know, now with South Korea and North Korea improving, with inter-Korean relations improving, military option is no longer really a viable option. I think one very important factor is actually timing. We have the American midterm elections coming up, and the closer we get to those elections, the more difficult it would be for any U.S. administration to compromise with North Korea. So I think it's very important for this South Korean delegation to be able to convince the United States, you know, that the ball is now in the U.S. courts, and now, you know, it's now or never, really. We want to start the ball rolling on denuclearization.
Right. Dr. Zhao, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi also said that now is the time to test whether all sides are sincere in their attitudes to resolve the issue. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump said he believed Pyongyang's offer for talks was sincere. However, the U.S. just slapped new sanctions on the DPRK after concluding Kim Jong Un's half-brother was killed by a chemical attack on the orders of the government. So is the Trump administration really sincere about resolving the crisis for now?
I think the U.S. is sincere in resolving the nuclear issue, but the United States also has this feeling that they have already achieved progress by implementing the so-called maximum pressure strategy. And their thinking is if they continue on this path and sustain this maximum pressure with comprehensive economic sanctions, they might be able to force North Korea to make greater concessions. I think that thinking runs the risk of wasting this opportunity if North Korea waits long enough and not seeing sufficient reciprocity from the United States. North Korea could very well move on with additional nuclear and missile tests, and that opportunity could be missed, and the future prospect for diplomacy.
What about on the side of the DPRK? Very briefly, 20 seconds, please. Do you think the DPRK is sincere?
I think DPRK is sincere. It has the technical capability to, for now, suspend missile and nuclear tests. North Korea will not give up its existing capabilities, but it is willing to make some small compromises of not further enhancing its capabilities.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to my two guests, Dr. Zhao Tong, Fellow at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy, and from London, Dr. Tat Yan Kong, Reader at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. And you're watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this. Stay with us, CGTN. China released its 2018 defense budget during the annual top legislative meeting and the MPC and the CPPCC this week. According to the plan, China's annual defense budget will reach around $175 billion, setting an 8% growth target, up from last year's 7%. As expected, some international media have immediately raised concerns that China is spending too much on defense and suspecting China of expansionist military ambitions. So exactly what's behind behind China's budget? Is it too much? Is it enough? And to answer these questions, I'm joined in the studio by Zhou Bo, Senior Colonel from the Chinese Ministry of National Defense. Senior Colonel Zhou, thank you very much for joining me today. First of all, what kind of international security situation we're looking at when China is talking about an increasing military spending?
Well, during Spring Festival, I just attended a Munich conference where the key word is disorder. When we talk about disorder, we talk about Europeans' uncertainty about its relationship with Russia. We talk about Russia's fierce response to Americans' so-called threat. We talk about
terrorism?
Terrorism, Russia, terrorism, and for the United States, it's a change of strategy, it's a new nuclear posture. So putting all this together, people have an unprecedented sense of insecurity, and that will explain why a lot of countries have actually increased the military spending.
8% annual growth, is it a lot, or is it too much, or is it too low?
Well, I think it's a fair increase, I would say, because over years, what is most interesting is that China actually has put its defense spending growth rate more or less around 1.5%.
Of the GDP?
Of the GDP, because how would you assess the threat, your situation? The defense spending is the best indicator of how one feels about his environment. But this lower and sustainable low defense spending would actually demonstrate China's confidence about herself, about the environment, and even about its relationship with the United States, which termed China for the first time as a strategic competitor.
Why is China so cool then when the United States is terming China as a strategic rival or competitor and posing great danger? Why is China still so cool about it?
Well, that is also a big surprise to us, because even in the report which described China as a strategic competitor, China only has quote, two crimes. One is using so-called predatory economics to intimidate its neighbors. The other is the so-called militarization of the features in South China Sea. But talking about the first one, trading essentially is mutually beneficial. Of course, there is unfair trading. But if China can use so-called predatory economics, how can China become the largest trading partner to 130 countries, including the United States? Right? Talking about South China Sea, yes, China did some land reclamation, but that is the only legitimate way for China to safeguard its own interest. So even putting all this together, how could China suddenly become a strategic competitor?
What about China's military spending to the neighboring countries? The fact that China is rather cool in increasing its military spending, what kind of effect will it have on its surrounding environment?
Well, some people argue that there is an arms race, but I don't think so, because a lot of countries simply do not have modern equipment. So from time to time, you have to buy something new. And in terms of China's relationship with neighbors, actually, we talk about if it is between China and most of the neighbors, it's very good. If it is between China and ASEAN, we only have problem with some claimants. And even with these some claimants, China's relationship with the Philippines, for example, has improved tremendously. We provided them everything, even 6,000 rifles. And one of the snipers just killed the so-called emir of the terrorist. So we give them for free to them, so they are grateful. And both of us have actually entered the bilateral consultation. And between China and ASEAN, we're talking about a code of conduct.
Let's talk about China's goal in terms of its military development. Basically, China wants to become a strong nation in terms of military by the middle of the century. However, with such a sustained modest military spending increase, do you think China is able to reach that goal? What is China's calculation?
I think it will be there with such a sustained growth rate, because if you look at what happened in the past, has China failed in any of its grand plan? No. China just has realized all of them. So in spite of such a crisis, like the collision of Chinese aircraft and American aircraft, and US-led bombing, NATO's bombing on China's former embassy in Yugoslavia, we actually have take great resilience and patience, yeah, in not making provocation or overreaction. So this kind of sustainable low defense spending definitely will take us, first of all, to our objective of becoming basically modernized by 2035 and to become first-class military by mid-century.
Let's talk a little bit about nuclear policy of major countries. We know that Trump administration rolled out this nuclear posture review recently, and then in it is talking about modernizing and rebuilding the U.S. Nuclear arsenal. And in terms of Russia, they are giving a very high profile, even eye-for-eye approach to that posture review. We've seen Putin giving his State of the Union address, and what is China's response to these developments?
Yeah, to some extent we understand all military arsenal, including nuclear arsenal, need to be modernized, and that is the exact reason Trump called for modernization of the American nuclear triad. But what is alarming is that he actually called for developing a low-yield warhead for submarine-launched ballistic missile, and even to launch a nuclear attack against non-nuclear attacks. Well, even laymen of international politics know this is immoral for the strongest power in the world to use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear attack. So we do not understand this. But in terms of China's policy, China, ever since the first nuclear test in 1964, have maintained no first use.
Right, but why is China staying cool in terms of this kind of up at the ante, you know, in the international nuclear narrative at least?
That's a good question, because China believes nuclear weapon is only for deterrence. You don't need many nuclear weapons. And what is the difference between destroying the world once or even 1,000 times? This is the same. And we don't mean to destroy the world, because when China conducted nuclear tests, we mean this is for self-defense, and we have declared a no first use of nuclear weapon policy ever since then. Over years, China has changed some of its defense policies, such as no stationing of troops overseas, such as no joint military exercise with the foreign countries. But China actually has changed this policy to adapt to the new reality of the world, but not on this no first use policy. And I don't believe China will ever change this policy, because we believe we only need to have a small nuclear arsenal that is strong enough to ensure second strike capability when China was struck nuclear strike first.
Is that why China is keeping its military spending growth rate at a relatively modest rate?
Well, this kind of sustainable low growth rate would include everything, including nuclear weapon, because on nuclear weapon it's a part of the issue on which we only maintain to have it small but strong.
Let's talk a little bit about the South China Sea. You mentioned a little bit. We have noticed some changes from the Obama administration to the Trump administration in terms of the U.S.'s presence and activeness in this region. We have witnessed regularized or even institutionalized cruises under the name of the freedom of navigation by U.S. military, by the U.S. Navy. What is your read into that?
Well, first of all, the so-called freedom of navigation is a non-issue for China and even for the United States, because China and the United States have a different reading of the same article of UNCLOS. Because in the first paragraph
the UN, the International Court governing the law of the sea.
Yeah, right. Because when we come to Article 58, the first paragraph says that all countries enjoy such rights of freedom of navigation over flight, but in the third paragraph it says that in doing so you must pay due regard to the rights and interests of littoral states. Yeah, so you must balance all these two kind of things. But the point is, the United States has maintained that this is not an issue between China and the United States, because they would not take position on this issue and they would not take sides. But having such kind of frequent patrolling into the 12 nautical miles of China-controlled islands and reefs, then what is the purpose? Then you actually are turning this kind of patrolling into an outstanding issue between China and the United States, because the water of the China-controlled island is not normally transited international passage. That's unusual.
Do you see in the near future the situation in the South China Sea being changed dramatically? What is the trajectory of the development?
Well, I think the United States most probably will continue to send these ships to challenge the so-called unlegitimate claims of China. But China would always send ships to monitor the situation and give warning to the ships. The good thing is, hopefully this would not turn into kind of confrontation or conflict, because up until now, both China and the United States are observing the rules of behavior which was signed between China and the United States. That essentially means when we are getting closer, we must behave professionally like a good airman or good seaman to avoid incidents. And we're doing that. I appreciate that.
Now, finally, comparing China's defense budget to that of other countries, for instance, NATO, where NATO members are required to spend at least 2% of their GDP on the military. China's number is 1.5%. How do you look at this kind of contrast?
Well, the reality is only 5 countries of NATO meet this standard. But NATO has 28 countries. The question is, why NATO only 5 countries meet the standard? Because deep in the heart of most of the countries, they don't believe it's necessary to meet this 2% standard. When I was in UK, somebody just told me why it is more important than, for example, education or healthcare.
But President Trump repeatedly asked these countries to raise their military spending.
That's right, because these countries do not have equal feeling of the threat. How about Russia? Russia's feeling Britain's feeling of Russia certainly is different from Eastern European countries' feeling of Russia.
Right, and exactly because China feels safe, relatively safe and relaxed, that's why China keeps its military spending at a relatively low level.
We feel safe, but more importantly, we feel confident about our own strengths.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zhou Bo, Senior Colonel from the Chinese Ministry of National Defense. And that is it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Twitter or Facebook using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application for CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.